that's something you would expect if there was a master programmer for life. It's not something that you would expect blind, pitiless indifference, undirected material processes to produce.
One thing I appreciated near the end too is you shared your own personal story about your longings for meaning early on, and your intellectual pursuits, and you get Steve Meyer, the person, not just the scholar, in this as well. But you told a story about Maria, um, someone that was there when you were lecturing. Tell us about that, and then also,
Well,
would
I
you
think
say
that's
something?
a story that's really relevant to a lot of what you all do on campus. We know
Yeah.
that from polling data that, and lots of anecdotal conversations that you have had with students, that I've had with students, that the college and university years can be very, very challenging to people who come to university believing in God, or people who want to explore those questions. The professorate is largely operating out of a default naturalistic worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets expressed in lots of different ways in the classroom and in the research environment. And many students of faith feel that they are kind of the odd man or odd young woman out, that they didn't get the memo. And the social pressure to conform, I think that all of us can feel in a situation like that, begins to affect people. And many students don't have good intellectual reasons for believing in God. And yet, as I've argued in the book, I think there are fantastically strong intellectual reasons for believing in God. And so I did a filmed interview several years ago talking about what would become the book Return of the God Hypothesis, and some of the key evidences that you and I have been discussing about the origin of the universe, its fine-tuning, and the origin of life. And in the middle of that discussion, the camera woman, stage left, began to weep visibly. And it was pretty noticeable to those of us doing the interview. And afterwards, she was a bit embarrassed about it. She wrote the producer who had hired her to do the filming, and explained that she had gone off to college as a theist, as a believer in God, and her science professors were constantly lecturing and making the point that the evidence was clear, that science had explained everything, and there was no need for belief in God, and it was even kind of intellectually disreputable. And she said, I was just at a loss. I had no idea how to defend the faith I had, and so she left university with a 4.0 in her biology major. Her professors wanted her to go on to grad school. But she was living in a state of cognitive dissonance. She didn't quite lose her faith, but she was in that state that many people are in, where they feel that the facts support unbelief or agnosticism, maybe even atheism, certainly materialism, and but still wanting to believe at some level and having that dissonance. So she went into film production instead. And when she heard me talking in this interview about some of these evidences, I think very powerful evidences for intelligent design, and indeed a theistic conception of the designer, the tears started to flow. She thought this was what she'd sort of been looking for, that she could be a scientist and a person of faith at the same time with integrity.
Right. And I see and I hear stories like this so much from parents. Secularism has created a brilliant way to get Christian parents and grandparents to pay for the apostasy of their own children, and it's at universities. But we as Christians have nothing to fear if we really take time to
nothing at all.
Look at the truth and the evidence.
I think we should be intellectually on the offense, because the evidence is so powerful. A quote I use as a framing device in the book is a wonderful quote from Richard Dawkins, where he says, the universe has precisely the properties we should expect if at bottom there's no purpose, no design, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. In other words, undirected materialistic processes. And yet, the three big discoveries that I address in the book, the universe had a beginning, the fine-tuning of the universe from the beginning, and the exquisite informational properties, a digital code and information processing system in the cell, are things that were not at all expected by a materialistic, by scientific materialists. And physicists spent much of the 20th century trying to generate alternative models to the Big Bang, because As Robert Dicke put it, famous Princeton physicist, an infinitely old universe would have relieved us of the necessity of explaining the origin of matter at any finite time in the past. Scientific materialism posited an eternal, self-existent physical universe, and yet the modern discoveries of astrophysics and astronomy and theoretical physics point to a finite universe that was not always here, and the origin of which needs to be explained by something non-physical or material. Because it's, after all, matter and physics that come into existence at that beginning point. Similarly, the fine-tuning was unexpected, and people have had to resort to very fanciful explanations, such as the multiverse, to try to account for it, and yet the multiverse itself requires unexplained prior fine-tuning. And recently, Richard Dawkins himself tweeted that that he was knocked sideways with wonder at the exquisite the data processing, the exquisite data processing system at work inside the cells, inside cells. And this was in a tweet last summer. He's also acknowledged that the machine code of the DNA is uncannily computer-like. That's something you would expect if there was a master programmer for life. It's not something that you would expect blind, pitiless indifference, undirected material processes to produce. Digital code, software, I'm sorry, that's not what physics and chemistry on their own do. So I think the major discoveries that have been made about biological and cosmological origins in the last 100 years are what you would expect from a theistic worldview and not what you'd expect from a materialistic one. And therefore, that confers evidential support on theism as a better explanation.